All right, so our next speaker is the leader of the BC Libertarian Party, and under his leadership, they ran 30 candidates in the last provincial election. So please welcome to the stage, Clayton Wellwood.
Good morning, everybody. Are you all excited to be here? I'm very excited. I'm very excited, very privileged to be speaking on the same stage as Jordan Peterson. And I'm very grateful as well to Students for Liberty. Thanks to Cooper, Jesse, and everybody else who organized this wonderful event. It was actually the Students for Liberty Regional Conference a couple years ago that was the first Liberty event that I went to. And I was just blown away by all the intelligent things that the speakers had to say and all the wonderful people there, that it just kind of launched me right into the liberty movement. And, a year later, I was leader of the BC Libertarian Party and, just loving everything I'm doing with this movement and all the great people. So, I'm thankful as well to a guy by the name of Robin Kerner, who has done a lot of analysis of the media and politics. So I want to talk a little bit about that today. I met Robin at the Students for Liberty National Convention, which was in Washington, D.C. in February this year. So he was there to debate Jeffrey Tucker on minarchism versus anarchism, which was a great conversation they had. And it was hugely inspiring to be in one place with 1,600 other people who cared about liberty, and very inspiring as well just to see the diversity of different organizations that were there, from campus clubs to think tanks to advocacy groups, lobby groups. So I'm referencing Robin Kerner because he studied how people come to their political views and under what circumstances they might be willing to change them. And I think that this is something that should interest libertarians, because we haven't been as successful as I think that we should be in terms of getting our message out to the public. And I think that the mainstream media is partly to blame there, which I'll talk about in a moment. But I actually think that the lion's share of the responsibility for that rests on our shoulders, in that we haven't been as good at communicating our ideas as we could be. So what I want to talk about is the relationship between media and politics. Now, I kind of see it as a dance between two partners, and they're going around and around and around ad nauseum. And I see three steps to this dance. The first one being that the media latches on to a problem in society. So it could be a real problem, or it could be, like maybe homelessness, let's say, or it could be some, overblown moral panic, like, Harvey Weinstein is a creep, so therefore all men are evil, that kind of a thing. So the media kind of gets going with this, and, as we know, they have their left-wing bias, which I won't get into. I want to talk about another deeper kind of bias that they have, and that is the seen versus the unseen. So you probably know Frederick Bastiat's anecdote about the broken window. So I want to apply that analysis of the seen and the unseen to a contemporary issue here in Vancouver, the high cost of housing. So what is easily seen is that, okay, cost of housing is going up and up year by year. There's a lot of people moving here from China and other parts of the world. Okay, there you've got your narrative. High housing costs are because foreign real estate speculation. Okay, fair enough, that is happening, but it's not the whole story. There's a lot of other factors. So you can look at things like the building permit process. So it takes about 2 years for the city of Vancouver to actually issue a building permit for a new building. So do you think that that has an effect on supply? Well, yeah, of course it does. Same with things like building code compliance. This drives up the cost of housing as well. Zoning laws. So 80 or 85% of the city of Vancouver is zoned just for single-family residential housing, which is just insane for a city of this size that is growing at the rate that it's growing. If you take an international comparison, something the media very, very rarely does, comparing across time to historical examples or across countries to other places besides the US. So if you take Tokyo, Japan, which has 14 million people in an area that's about the size of the Lower Mainland, like from West Van to Surrey, 14 million people in this area. What would you guess is the rental vacancy rate there compared to our less than 1%? Anybody want to hazard a guess? What's that? It's actually over 30%. So Tokyo does not have a housing supply problem, and it's not all huge towers there. It's mostly just low-rise developments. So what's wrong with Vancouver? Well, we've got extremely restrictive zoning laws here, whereas in Japan, those zoning laws, they exist, but they're very liberal. So the media tends to be biased towards what is easily seen, and they look at events in isolation, and this often leads them to misdiagnosing the problem. And it also leads to this sort of general feeling or narrative where it's like this problem has come out of nowhere and just like blindsided us, right? And that leads to a sort of a panicked approach, which is something like, oh, we have to do something about this now. But, if you take a step back and look at the whole picture, you look at the historical trend, then maybe you wouldn't be so panicked, because this we have to do something now is something that by default it's calling for more government intervention, right? Because somebody is the government, right? Okay, so that's the first step in this media politics dance. The second step, politicians, ever eager to be seen doing something, they pass laws, set up programs to deal with the issue that the media has created a firestorm about. But there's two important things that they don't do. The first thing that they don't do is they don't do a trend line test to see what was happening with a problem before they got involved. Was the problem getting better? Maybe civil society was dealing with it effectively. Was it getting worse? Was it staying the same? Who knows? Second thing they don't do is they don't collect results to even see if their program is meeting its targets. Okay, some government agencies do, but a lot don't, or they don't do a proper methodological approach to collecting that data. So the third step in this dance is, because there's no results to publish, there's nothing for the media to report on, and after the initial flurry of reporting, the issue kind of dies down. This makes me think of the case of Attawapiskat. So that was that First Nation in Northern Ontario about a year and a half ago. There was a rash of tragic suicides, young people committing suicides. And so there was a big media storm about it. Now, do we hear anything about it? No, of course we don't. A year after they declared a state of emergency there were actually a couple of articles that came out. Guess what? Things are still shitty there. Even though the government promised all these extra resources for mental health and whatnot. So basically step 3 is time is passing and the problem still persists, kind of blackout on coverage. But then, years will go by and something will happen to reignite the media cycle again. It could be an election where there's a party that's vying for power. They want to call out the incumbent party on their bad record on dealing with the issue. Or maybe something newsworthy happens and the reporters just go and pick up a story and run with it. So this starts it over again, but are they going to look at the history to see what happened before to give some context to the issue? Rather doubtful. So, how can we break this cycle? Well, I think that getting the mainstream media, journalists, and editors to see the error of their ways is a rather hopeless task. But thankfully, there are some independent outlets that are doing investigative journalism. So Dan Dix with Press for Truth, who's here today, is one of them here in Western Canada in our movement. Josh Sigurdsson with World Alternative Media is another. And then you've got really amazing ones in the States like Project Veritas. So you've got that, and then you've got the social media world as well. Theron talked a lot about that and ways that we can engage better with that, but it is still prone to, these echo chambers that tend to amplify political tribalism. So the whole media landscape is evolving, and where it's going to be in 10 or 20 years, we don't know. But just to come back to this problem that Robin Kerner identified, I think that he sums up the problem and the solution really nicely when he says that we need to focus on winning supporters instead of focusing on winning arguments. And the way that he suggests you do that is face-to-face, one-to-one conversations where you're really listening to people, developing a rapport with them, understanding their issues before you launch into why you think libertarianism is the best fit for them. So media isn't really great for having those kind of conversations. One exception to that, though, podcasts. Podcasts are wonderful. I get most of my information from podcasts. And we've got some great podcasts for our movement here now in BC. We've got Kyle McCormick's New Liberty podcast. We've got Garrett Peterson's Economics Detective. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience. Anybody fans of that show? Oh yeah, awesome. Well, I think it's one of the greatest vehicles out there for advancing ideas of liberty, partly because it's not a libertarian podcast. He talks about anything, anything that interests him to anybody. He's developed a huge audience that way, so that's wonderful. So he had Russell Brand on there a little while ago, and they had a wonderful free-ranging conversation over the course of 3 hours where they talked about all sorts of different topics. And so one of the topics they talked about they disagreed on was capitalism. And it's really interesting to listen to how Joe Rogan talked about this issue to Russell Brand. He didn't try and beat him over the head with like really watertight arguments about why capitalism is superior to other economic systems. He just leaned on that rapport that he had developed with Russell Brand to kind of get him to step outside of his paradigm and see things in a different light. And I don't know if he was successful at that. I think he might have been, but it's interesting to see how their conversation works out on that. Sorry, just need a little sip of water here. So you might be thinking, well, Clayton, we just need to do something outrageous, right, to get some attention in the media. So I wanted to address that for a second because I was thinking about this a couple years ago. There was an issue that was really grinding my gears. It was the BC Wolf Cull program. I don't know if you know this program, but anyways, the provincial government spends our tax dollars to fly people around in helicopters shooting wolves so that they can somehow protect the caribou population. I think it's a really simplistic approach to a complex ecological problem, but I thought, well, okay, if they're gonna do this program, they should at least do it in a way that costs taxpayers less. So I thought, okay, well, I could just get like a little stockpile of ammunition and I could sit like maybe outside the convention center here and I could have a little sign that says, help the government and the caribou, free ammo if you kill a wolf. That'd get media attention, right? Well, I chickened out because, I have a family and I don't want to go to jail and stuff like that. So anyways, have at the idea. You can run with it if you want. I think every student activist should risk arrest at least once in their career. So, but I don't want to be just a flash in the pan for, libertarian ideas. We really need to be in it for the long term. And so I want to focus the rest of my talk on the strategy which I call doing good works. So what do I mean by that? I mean getting our hands dirty in tangible projects that advance liberty. And I know it's tough, we live in the information age, there's all these channels that we have online and so forth, where we can vent our frustration on an issue, but if doing that provides enough catharsis that you don't feel compelled to actually do anything tangible to remedy the injustice that you're all fired up about, then I think that's a pity. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that you commit to spending 2 hours less per week on social media and devote that time to a tangible project. And I think if we do that, we can accomplish a lot. Now, I'm going to give you a couple ideas here on the sort of stuff that we can do. The first one is to be a voice of reason in electoral contests. So what I mean by that is running as a candidate federally, provincially, even municipally as an independent, or as a libertarian. So Myself and Don Wilson, the president of the BC Libertarian Party, who's here today. So we were invited, we were both candidates for North Vancouver in the provincial election. We were invited to a North Vancouver School District forum on education. So it was one of these things where, it's in a school gym, maybe 25 people there. There was an incumbent BC Liberal MLA there, Jane Thornthwaite. There was 3 NDP candidates, 3 Green candidates. And anyways, the questions were things like, how will you facilitate provincial funding for capital projects such as new schools? And how will you facilitate meaningful involvement between the provincial government and boards of education? So anyways, you get the idea. It was a real snooze fest. And then the socialist candidates opened their mouths and things really got boring. It was all about, oh, well, you've underfunded education for 16 years and the poor children and they can't learn and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, it was just that over and over and over. It was so nauseating. And I just think that, the audience really would have got nothing out of this experience other than, same old left, right, this. When what you need on this sort of a topic, especially for a sector like education that's been insulated from innovation by the government for decades, what you need is outside the box solutions. So I'm going to give you what Don's answer was to the question about meeting diverse needs of students as a way of showing, sometimes you got to give people a little bit of a shock to, get them to think about things in a different way. So what he said is, the most important consideration is that the quality of education isn't simply lowered to the lowest common denominator in a futile effort to help every student in a one-size-fits-all approach. More focus should be given to the success of skilled students so that the quality of their education isn't unfairly diminished on behalf of less capable children. Holy shit, Don, you can't say some kids aren't as smart as others. Everybody knows it's true, but it's not on the 3x5 index card of allowable opinion. So, for my part, I talked about the educational voucher proposal that we had as part of our platform for the provincial election, and how it, we hope that it could develop into a kind of educational ecosystem of different schools that would cater to the diverse needs of children in terms of, their aptitudes, their interests, their learning styles. It would provide, public funding still and provide public schools for people who wanted that. And it would introduce a measure of accountability to parents and students, which is sorely lacking from our current system, because, people would be able to take their voucher and go to another school if they didn't like the quality of education they were getting. And it would save taxpayers money. We're right now spending something like $20,000 a head on students, per student in the current system. We could maybe do this for 10 or 12,000. So, anyways, if you're interested in becoming a candidate for the BC Libertarian Party, please come and talk to me or Don or anybody else. But I think that libertarians have a lot to offer in these sort of electoral contexts in terms of just broadening the debate, right? Because we do certain things. We look at the data, we look at historical trends, and, we work from first principles to figure out if a given approach is, first of all, morally ethical, right? And secondly, if it's actually practically feasible. And meanwhile, our Borg competitors, so when I'm talking about the Borg, I'm talking about the blue, orange, red, and green parties. So the Borg candidates, they just seem to be interested in, virtue signaling to their ideological base, whether they be on the left or right or whatever, which isn't really a very good way of solving complex real-world problems. Bear with me again. Okay, second thing we can do. We can lobby to repeal freedom-crushing laws, or at least call some attention to them. So there's many such laws and regulations. I'm going to talk about 2 types. One is laws that allow a privileged group to benefit economically while forcing the rest of us to pay more for essentials. So this would be things like the restrictions on interprovincial trade in services or in goods like alcohol. It's things like supply management of eggs, dairy, and poultry that make us all pay more every time we go to the grocery store. And things like the much hated ICBC monopoly on automobile liability insurance. So all these things have concentrated benefits and dispersed costs, which makes it hard to get the momentum to overcome them. But I feel that there is actually a lot of popular support for getting rid of these stupid things because they cost regular British Columbians and Canadians. They really hit them in the pocketbook. And they're just not right. It's just crony capitalism. So we just need somebody to lead the charge to rally that existing public support to get rid of these, get rid of this legislation that keeps these things in place. Why can't libertarians do that? Okay, second type of freedom-crushing laws I want to talk about is laws that allow the state to take away something a person holds dear. So here I'm thinking about things like the power of the Ministry of Children and Family Development to separate parents from kids, kids from parents, even when there's no evidence of abuse or neglect. Talking about things like eminent domain laws that allow the government to bulldoze your house to make way for a dam, or because you didn't get a building permit for something you're doing on your property. I'm talking about human rights complaint systems that allow cry bullies to ruin an innocent person's reputation with spurious allegations and possibly ruin them financially defending against those allegations. So these are causes that other parties will not be interested in taking up. But libertarians can. And I think that they're like David and Goliath stories that regular people can actually relate to. We just need to become better storytellers to get these stories out there. And I would suggest looking to the Institute for Justice as a model on how to do that well. Okay, the third area of action I want to talk about in terms of good works, scaling up voluntary alternatives to government services. So I gave a talk on this 3 weeks ago at an event called Freedom Meet Vancouver, organized by my friend Gavin Frey, who's here somewhere today. We hope that he'll make it into an annual event so that you can all attend next year. So I discovered in researching this that a lot of things that we think of government services as being monopolized by the state aren't completely monopolized. There's still some room on the margins for new entrants to get a hold. So I think that if we can do that, we can get a toehold in these industries, we can create voluntary alternatives there or scale them up. I think it gives us the opportunity to actually show people what our philosophy is all about. And I think that this is more fruitful than asking people to imagine a world where, the government doesn't own the roads or run the hospitals. When people can see it, it will become more real to them. So, it can be really a lot of hard work, though, to develop these alternatives, whether you're doing it in, the for-profit sector or the non-profit sector, and to scale them up where they're big enough to be noticeable. But, if you don't like hard work, well then, why are you hanging out with libertarians? Go join Students for Communism. Oh wait, I think that's one of those clubs that you're forced to join. You have to pay dues to, can't opt out of. A student union, I think they call it. So, anyways, I'll give you one example of a voluntary alternative. And I chose this one because it's one that's paid for by taxes but doesn't actually function effectively everywhere. And I'm talking about policing in inner city Detroit. So there's a guy there by the name of Dale Brown, and he saw an opportunity to provide security services to reduce the thefts and assaults that were going on there because the police weren't responding to 911 calls. So he just started out with himself, a rifle, a dog, and a commitment to protecting the lives and property of the people in his neighborhood. And after a relatively short amount of time, he managed to stop all of the violent crime, all of the home invasions that were going on there. So huge success just doing that on his own. But he's managed to scale it up into an actual business called the Threat Management Center. He's training people in his method of crime prevention and diffusing violent situations. And now they're operating across the city of Detroit. So there's some great videos on YouTube about this. I encourage you to go check it out. One of them is part of Reason TV's Anarchy in Detroit series. So just to summarize the areas of good works I talked about, being a voice of reason in electoral contests. Number 2, lobbying to repeal freedom-crushing laws. 3rd, scaling up voluntary alternatives to government services. So in all of these things, I think it's Dale Brown's spirit of entrepreneurialism that we need to cultivate. I think that what we're good at is seeing a problem, devising a solution, and then implementing it. And if it doesn't work, trying a different approach. So it can be very tempting, I think, to just, sit on the sidelines, very satisfied in the knowledge that our political philosophy is superior to all others, which it is, but, I think that you'll find it more satisfying to really engage in good works that advance the cause of liberty. And I think that if we can do that and libertarians can start to gain a reputation for actually getting stuff done, especially in the current political environment of hyperpartisanship, I think that that will be excellent and it will make our efforts worthy of media attention. If we can get that media attention, then we'll have the opportunity to explain our approach, which is looking at the data, studying history, and coming up with innovative solutions that don't involve coercion. Thanks very much. So I don't know if you guys have any questions, but if so, I'm happy to try and respond. Yeah.
A couple points. I guess we do have some ways of nullifying some laws in Canada, which is jury nullification, something that people don't really talk about a whole lot. I think it's important, drug laws in particular, they could be taken care of with that. And the other thing is that it really helps that when you make your arguments, that you know them. Not everybody knows the arguments they're trying to make. Excuse me. And I've seen people try to make arguments and they just don't understand them that well. You probably shouldn't try if you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also leading by example, being successful. People listen to successful people.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for your comments. Yeah.
Hello.
Howdy.
Just want to share my experience with you that I had with the Green Party. About 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit more, I heard a very similar story. They were never getting, the mainstream media coverage. And there was that hope that, if we just do this or that, maybe we'll get it. But remember that the media is owned by, a very small number of corporations that want the world to run the way it does.
Yeah.
So they ended up getting Elizabeth May elected, and they kind of swooped her into Sydney, which was a very small riding, where she could actually door-to-door, like the whole riding. So I'm just sharing this experience because maybe some reflection might help you get a leader yourself elected. So a small riding that you can door-to-door. But the mainstream media thing, they always wanted to get covered, and they never ever did. But what got them elected was climate change. So it was like this giant hoax that global media ran with for years until it was part of the public subconscious. And then the Greens got elected sort of by fiat. So I almost think find an issue that the corporate media won't let go of and kind of hijack it in a sense. I don't know if hijack's the right word, but I don't see any other way of getting her done. Sorry.
Thanks. We'll keep trying. Asha.
Okay, first bit of advice. I think I've talked to you about this before, but this kind of can go for a lot of people. I do have a question after this, though.
Yeah.
A friend of mine was part of the Libertarian Party, the National, in Saskatoon, and a great way that he found to get himself actually being able to talk to media, given that typically they're not going to talk to you guys because you're not a main party, and then if we do that, then you have to go talk to every other party, and there's 50 of them, and it's hard. It is. But he found that going to protests or events that weren't necessarily a party event were just like, for example, he went to one when the refugee whole issue was coming up, and it was a big thing of, we love refugees, we want them, we support them. He's like, I like this idea, I can get behind this. It's not a political event necessarily for my party, but he went, he talked, he got on CTV. His name, Libertarian Party underneath.
Yep.
It was a quirky little way for him to be like, I'm here, I support this. I just don't happen to be a politician.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
We need to be present at stuff that's going on. We can't just be in our own little libertarian bubble and ignoring what's going on in the rest of it. Yeah, we need to be present at other events and just be out there shaking hands, meeting people, letting them know that we're just normal people that care about the same kind of stuff that they care about.
But my question is that branding is kind of the theme. Is that even saying the word libertarian, or God forbid you say the word anarchist, already has that image in somebody's head. It does happen in media. It happens for everybody. It happens for us. Happens for everyone. What is your party doing to get past that first hurdle? Because I love all the things you're talking about how we can have those arguments or have those discussions and bring up those points. But if you can't get past that first word of, hi, I'm from the Libertarian Party, door slam, how are you going to get to the rest of that?
Don't say you're from the Libertarian Party. Ask them how their day is going. Ask them what's on their mind, what issues they care about. Let them talk first. I think that political engagement has so much to do with listening, and I think that because we're so convinced as libertarians that we've got the right way figured out, we just haven't done a good enough job of listening to other people's concerns. So we need to really start with that when we're trying to engage other people.
Thank you.
Hello. Just want to say thanks for the talk. I really enjoyed it, and I apologize in advance because I have a bit of a challenging question. So in your talk, you said you're in it for the long run. No, I'm not going to throw a tomato. Yeah. So in your talk, you said you were in it for the long run. So I'm just reacting to this because I'm not a Canadian. I come from California, and I've been very aware of just like a huge cultural change that's happened in my own country. Just looking at the 20 years I've been politically aware, I'm a bit long on the tooth. We've gone from a young culture in California among college students that's been overwhelmingly supportive of liberty as a value to present polls where you get about 60% of college students saying that offensive speech is not guaranteed under the First Amendment or shouldn't be guaranteed under the First Amendment. That's in 20 years. So my question to everyone on the libertarian side is, this seems to be sort of the seismic issue of our day. I really appreciate all the things you're talking about with vouchers and getting rid of government waste, but this has largely been the objective of the Libertarian Party for the last 20 years since I've been aware. These are not new issues. But in this very time, the concept of liberty as a value in the culture as a whole has just eroded beneath you. And if you lose that, that's it. That's game over. Because at the point where 20% of the population are the only people who care about even something as fundamental as freedom of speech, I don't think there's going to be a huge platform for liberty as some kind of political coalition that can carry elections. So do you have any ideas of how you'd address the cultural issue that's sort of taking the culture out from underneath the very concept of liberty?
Well, I think that the reason why I'm involved in electoral politics is because I'm interested in changing the culture. I don't think that we need to be dead set focused on doing whatever we have to do to get elected. You know, we need to try to keep getting people elected, but really the point of having people, libertarians on the ballot, like I said in my talk, is really to broaden the discussion, to push that Overton window open, and to keep the ideas, to keep talking about liberty. And I think that elections are a great way to get our message to a broader audience. But yeah, you're absolutely right that culture should be our focus. Although I'm not as convinced that it's as bad as that statistic about the students on campus who are surveyed. Yeah, that's a particular sort of micro culture, right, where leftists have just completely taken over there. So it's a bit weird, and I think that there's a silent majority of, just regular, working middle class people throughout North America that still basically hold the same values. They still value free enterprise, they still value economic and civil liberties, they still think that the government should be somewhat restrained in what it does. So we just need to find those people and to say, hey, listen, we could lose this stuff, right? Unless we all kind of stand up and work together to try and preserve what's good about our society.
Thank you.
Hate to do this again, but we have time for 3 more brief and succinct questions.
I'll try to do that. Clayton, I really liked the fact that you mentioned Frederick Bastiat. I think knowing these thinkers and their ideas is very important. I think we have a great crowd with a bunch of different levels of knowledge. So my question is, can you explain the broken window fallacy for those who may not know it?
Sure. So Frederick Bastiat, so he's a 19th century French political economist. And what he talked a lot about economics and sort of economic fallacies, right? So the fallacy that he was getting at with the broken window is the idea that, okay, somebody breaks a window, but then somebody has to spend money and to repair it, okay, so that provides work. So it's like in modern terms, they didn't say that back then, but in modern terms, you say, oh, well, it increased GDP. So it's great, right? Well, no. Actually, the way that you need to look at it, the way that you need to look at wealth is that it's something that allows you to overcome a problem that you have. So it could be something material, or there's other types of wealth. So let's compare the two situations. The first one where the window's broken and then the owner of that home spends $50 to repair it. Okay, there you go. $50 has been spent, you got a window. But let's take the other case, so what is unseen. What is unseen is, what if the window hadn't been broken? Okay, well in that case, the owner of the home would still have the $50, which he could go and spend on a new suit or whatever, and he'd still have the window. So which situation is better overall, net benefit for society? Well, it's a situation where the window isn't broke. So saying that, okay, well, the window got broken, oh, but it's good because somebody got work to repair it. No, 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 it's an economic fallacy. In order to understand the true economic situation, you need to look at what is seen and also what is unseen. That's basically the broken window fallacy. Thanks, Matt.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It was very entertaining and informing. Just have a quick question about BC ferries, because I seem to, myself, friends, family, social media, see a lot of frustration with BC ferries and their sort of monopoly over the ferry routes, and I was just curious what you think of that.
It's actually not a monopoly, as far as I understand it. I could be wrong. If there's somebody here who can correct me on that, please let me know. But there are other services, right, both on the water and by air that can get you to Vancouver Island. What I don't like about BC ferries is that it is kind of the worst type of privatization, right? It's taking something, you know, that was originally designed as, okay, well, this is meant to be part of the road system. And, you know, it's going to be paid for largely out of taxes with some user fees and that sort of thing. But now we said, okay, well, we're not going to turn it over to the private market. We're going to turn it over to a crown corporation. And now this corporation, they got a, when you're out for lunch, just go check out their office because they've got their BC Ferries travel. Okay, that is the most prime real estate you can get in Vancouver. Like, they got to be paying $30,000 a month or more just to lease that space. I mean, it's insane. So that they can do, you know, well, vacation to Haida Gwaii, this and that. No, just let us get from the mainland to Vancouver. I mean, look at Washington State Ferries. They do things in a much more economical way. It's old rust buckets, but they work, they run on time, and it costs half of what BC Ferries costs.
Sweet, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
One more question, I think. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming. Darren Miller, Director at Large for the Conservative Party of BC. I noticed in your opening remarks that you said that the building code was something that was contributing to the housing crisis. Are you suggesting that contractors and developers shouldn't have to follow a building code? I'd appreciate if you'd expand on that.
Well, I'm just pointing out that when you've got very complex building codes, and the City of Vancouver is a prime example of this, where they continually add provisions to the building code without getting rid of the older ones, it just results in higher compliance costs. I think that buildings should be built well. I work in the construction industry myself, and I can see that, there's a need for this, but, there could be other ways of going about it. You could have, some kind of like a culling process where you get rid of the older irrelevant parts of the codes. You could have a system of competing voluntary codes, right, that are made by different organizations based on different standards. It doesn't have to be the city enforcing its one view of this is how a building must be built.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks very much, everybody.